She's hiding her intelligence. That's what happens at the Gilded Gate Hotel, San Francisco, where Malika Johnson, 25, a hotel cleaner, is treated unfairly and forced to work hard. Orphaned at a young age, raised by loving grandparents, she scrubs floors to survive, hiding a dream nurtured by language. One fateful night, answering a frantic phone call in fluent German, Malika easily directs a lost guest, unaware that Grayson Caldwell, the hotel's richest owner, has heard her. Her sharp, confident voice piques his curiosity. Who is this woman? Invisible yet extraordinary. What secrets lie beneath her uniform? Follow us as we explore a journey of courage, betrayal, and the truth that changes everything. Subscribe now to see our latest stories and leave comments. Where are you watching from? Don't miss how Malika's hidden talent lights up a world that tried to bury her. Join us. The Gilded Gate Hotel stood like a cathedral of wealth on San Francisco's Nob Hill, its marble floors gleaming under chandeliers that dripped golden light. At 2 a.m., the lobby was a hushed kingdom, the only sounds the faint hum of air conditioning and the rhythmic swish of a mop. Malika Johnson, 25, moved through this opulent silence, a shadow in an oversized housekeeping uniform. Her dark skin glistened with sweat, her tightly coiled hair tucked beneath a faded cap. To the guests who glided past during the day, oil, tycoons, tech moguls, minor royalty, she was invisible, a fixture as unremarkable as the polished brass fixtures she scrubbed. But Malika carried a secret, one that burned brighter than the crystal sconces above her. Orphaned at 7, Malika had been raised in a cramped Oakland apartment by 2 foster grandfathers, Ezekiel and Amos, whose love was fierce, but whose wallets were thin. Their tiny home smelled of sage and old books, the walls papered with dreams they couldn't afford. Ezekiel, a retired bus driver, would hum gospel tunes while cooking collards. Amos, a former carpenter, carved wooden birds that lined the windowsill. They'd taken Malika in when the world had turned its back, teaching her that grit and heart could outshine circumstance. "You're a star, baby girl," Ezekiel would say, his voice rough with age. "Don't let nobody dim you." Malika clung to those words, even as poverty pressed against her like a tide. To keep the lights on, she worked the graveyard shift at the Gilded Gate, a job she'd landed 3 years ago despite the hiring manager's sneer. "We're desperate," he'd muttered, eyeing her skin as if it were a stain. "Don't expect special treatment." Malika hadn't asked for any. She took the heaviest tasks, scrubbing grout, hauling linens, cleaning suites after raucous parties, without complaint. Her hands, calloused and cracked, told a story of endurance, but her mind was a storm of ambition. In stolen moments, she studied languages, German, French, Japanese, and more, on a cracked laptop at the public library. Each word she mastered was a brick in the bridge to a better life, a way to honor the men who'd raised her. Tonight, the lobby was emptier than usual, the air thick with the damp chill of San Francisco's fog. Malika pushed her cleaning cart, its wheels squeaking faintly, and paused to wipe down the reception desk. The phone, a sleek black relic, sat silent, its cord coiled like a sleeping snake. She adjusted her cap, catching her reflection in the polished countertop, eyes heavy with fatigue, but sharp with something unbroken. She whispered a German phrase under her breath. "Ich schaffe das," I can do this, practicing for the proficiency test she dreamed of taking. The words felt like a prayer, a defiance against the world that saw her as less. Then the phone rang, shattering the silence. Malika froze, her rag hovering over the desk. Housekeepers weren't supposed to answer. Phones, that was the receptionist's job. But the night shift was skeletal and the front desk was unmanned. The ringing persisted, insistent, a cry in the dark. She glanced around, seeing only the empty expanse of marble and the faint glow of streetlights through the glass doors. With a steadying breath, she lifted the receiver. "Hello, Gilded Gate." "Hotel," she said, her voice soft but clear. A torrent of rapid German poured through the line, frantic and jagged. The caller, a guest, was lost in the city's labyrinthine streets, his rental car stalled near the Embarcadero. His words tumbled over each other, fear, frustration, a plea for help. Malika's pulse quickened, but her mind snapped into focus. She responded in flawless German, her accent crisp, her tone calm as a diplomat's. Bitte beruhigen Sie sich, she said. Please calm down. She asked for landmarks, piecing together his location, and guided him step by step back to the hotel's private garage. You're almost here, she assured him. Look for the golden sign. The call lasted 3 minutes. When she hung up, the lobby felt heavier, as if the air had thickened with the weight of what she'd done. She exhaled, her hands trembling slightly, and resumed wiping the desk, the rag moving in slow, deliberate circles. She didn't know that someone had been watching. Grayson Caldwell stood in the shadows near the grand staircase, his tailored coat blending into the dark. At 38, he was a man of quiet power, his sharp jaw and piercing gray eyes commanding rooms without effort. The Gilded Gate was his crown jewel, one of many in his empire, but he rarely walked its halls at night. Tonight, restless after a late meeting, he'd come to inspect the property, to feel its pulse when the guests slept. He hadn't expected to find her. Grayson had heard whispers about a housekeeper who solved guest problems with uncanny skill, calming disputes, giving directions, all without fanfare. He'd dismissed them as exaggerations, the kind of stories staff spun to pass time. But now, watching Malika, he felt a jolt of curiosity, sharp as a blade. Her voice, steady and fluent, had cut through the lobby's silence like a beacon. She hadn't hesitated, hadn't stumbled over a single word. Who was she? Why was someone with such talent scrubbing floors? He stepped closer, his polished shoes silent on the marble but stopped short of approaching. Malika, oblivious, tucked a stray curl under her cap and pushed her cart toward the service elevator. Her movements were efficient, practiced, but there was a grace to them, a quiet dignity that Grayson couldn't ignore. He leaned against a pillar, his mind turning. The Gilded Gate employed hundreds, most of whom he knew only as names on payroll. Malika Johnson wasn't one he'd noticed, until now. Back in Oakland, Malika's night wasn't over. The bus ride home was a blur of flickering streetlights and the low rumble of the engine. She clutched her cleaning tote, her body aching, but her thoughts were on the German call. Had she broken a rule? Would the manager, with his thin lips and colder eyes, reprimand her? She pushed the fear down. She'd helped someone. That was enough. Her apartment, a third-floor walk-up, was dark when she arrived. Ezekiel and Amos were asleep, their snores a soft duet through the thin walls. Malika tiptoed to the kitchen, where a chipped mug and a worn notebook waited. She brewed tea, the steam curling like a ghost, and opened her notebook. Pages of German vocabulary, French conjugations, and Japanese kanji filled the margins, her handwriting neat despite her exhaustion. She whispered another phrase, Ich bin genug, I am enough, letting the words anchor her. As she studied, the city outside hummed its restless song, sirens, distant horns, the faint clatter of a trash can. Malika didn't hear it. She was lost in her world, a place where languages were keys to doors she'd yet to open. She didn't know that Grayson, back at the hotel, was already pulling her employee file, his fingers pausing over the sparse details. Malika Johnson, 25. Hi. School diploma, hired 2022, no skills listed. He frowned. Something didn't add up. In the quiet of her kitchen, Malika closed her notebook and pressed her forehead against the cool table. Dawn was hours away, but sleep felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. She thought of her grandfathers, their weathered hands and unwavering belief. She thought of the guest on the phone, his voice softening with relief. And she thought of the hotel, its glittering facade hiding her truth. She was invisible, but she was not silent. And tonight, without knowing it, she'd been heard. The Gilded Gate Hotel exhaled its midnight hush, the lobby's chandeliers casting fractured light across the marble expanse. It was 1:30 a.m., and the air clung heavy with San Francisco's summer damp, a faint mist seeping through the glass doors. Malika Johnson, 25, pushed her cleaning cart along the lobby's edge, her oversized uniform damp with sweat, her dark eyes scanning the floor for smudges. The hotel, a glittering fortress for the world's elite, was her battleground, where she fought invisibility with every swipe of her rag. Her hands, rough from years of labor, gripped the cart's handle, but her mind wandered to the French verbs she'd studied that morning, whispered promises of a life beyond these walls. Malika's world was a tightrope stretched between survival and ambition. Orphaned at 7, she'd been raised by Ezekiel and Amos, her foster grandfathers, in a weathered Oakland apartment that smelled of sage and hope. Their love was her anchor, their poverty her spur. By day, she pored over languages, German, French, Japanese, on a library laptop, each syllable a step toward freedom. By night, she scrubbed the Gilded Gates floors, a job she'd won despite the hiring manager's disdain for her black skin. "You're here because we're desperate," he'd sneered, piling on the heaviest tasks. Malika bore it silently, her resilience a quiet rebellion against a world that tried to dim her. Tonight, the lobby felt heavier, as if the fog outside had crept in, curling around the velvet armchairs. Malika's cart squeaked faintly, a lonely sound in the vast silence. She paused near the grand glass doors, wiping their brass handles, her reflection a ghost in the polished surface. Her cap, frayed at the edges, hid her coiled hair, but her eyes burned with a fire no uniform could smother. She mouthed a French phrase, "Je suis assez," I am enough, a mantra against the ache in her bones. Then she heard it, a soft, choking sob from the corner of the lobby, near a cluster of potted ferns. Malika froze, her rag still in hand. The sound was small, fragile, like a bird with a broken wing. She turned, her gaze landing on a girl, no older than 10, curled into a velvet chair. The child's blonde hair fell in tangled strands over her tear-streaked face, her delicate dress crumpled. Malika recognized her. Sophie, a French guest staying with her family in the penthouse suite. She'd seen them earlier, the parents' sharp voices cutting through the lobby as they berated their daughter. Malika's first instinct was to retreat. Housekeepers weren't supposed to engage with guests, especially not children of the elite. The manager's rules echoed in her mind. Stay invisible, don't speak unless spoken to. But the girl's sobs grew sharper, each one a needle in Malika's chest. She glanced around. The lobby was empty, the night receptionist gone, the doorman likely smoking out back. No one else was coming. Malika's heart, forged in the warmth of her grandfather's love, wouldn't let her walk away. She set her rag on the cart and approached, her soft-soled shoes silent on the marble. Kneeling beside the chair, she kept her voice low, her French, fluent and warm like a lullaby. "Petite, pourquoi pleures-tu? Little one, why are you crying?" Sophie's head jerked up, her blue eyes wide with surprise. The words, in her native tongue, were a lifeline in the cold grandeur of the hotel. She sniffled, wiping her nose with a crumpled sleeve. "They said I'm useless," she whispered in French, her voice trembling. "I forgot the dinner reservation, and Papa yelled. He said I'm a failure." Malika's throat tightened. She knew that word, useless, knew how it could burrow into a heart and stay there. She thought of Ezekiel's calloused hands, Amos's gentle smile, the way they'd taught her to rise above cruelty. "You're not useless," she said softly, her French flowing like a river. "You're enough, Sophie, let me tell you something." She sat back on her heels, her uniform creasing, and shared a piece of her truth. "I grew up with nothing but 2 old men who loved me. We had no money, no fancy house. But they taught me to dream. I work here, cleaning floors, but I'm learning languages to change my life. If I can do that, you can do anything." Sophie's tears slowed, her small hands unclenching. Malika's words, woven with grit and hope, were a mirror, reflecting the girl's own strength. "You're brave," Sophie said, her voice a whisper. Malika smiled, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. "So are you. Don't let anyone tell you different." She stood, offering a hand. "Let's get you back to your room, okay?" As Malika guided Sophie toward the golden elevators, she didn't see the man watching from behind a marble pillar. Grayson Caldwell, in a tailored charcoal coat, had slipped into the lobby to check the night operations. At 38, he was a man of precision, his gray eyes missing nothing. He'd come expecting to find a flaw, a smudged window, a misaligned chair. But instead, he found her. Malika's voice, soft yet commanding in French, had stopped him cold. Her empathy, her fluency, her ability to turn a child's despair into hope. It was extraordinary, a stark contrast to the menial role she played. Grayson leaned against the pillar, his arms crossed, his mind racing. He'd overheard her German on the phone the previous night, A moment that had lodged in his eye. Memory like a splinter. Now, this. Who was Malika Johnson? Why was someone with such gifts, linguistic, human, hidden in a housekeeper's uniform? He watched as she pressed the elevator button for Sophie, her posture steady, her expression tender. The girl stepped inside, offering a shy wave. Malika waved back, then turned to her cart, resuming her work as if nothing had happened. But something had. Grayson's curiosity, sharp as a blade, cut deeper. He'd built an empire by spotting potential where others saw none, and Malika was a puzzle he couldn't ignore. Her file, which he'd glanced at after the German call, was sparse. 25, high school diploma, hired 2022, no skills listed. It didn't match the woman he'd just seen, whose words had mended a child's heart. He stepped back, his shoes silent on the marble, and slipped into the service hallway. He wouldn't approach her, not yet, but he would watch. Malika, oblivious, pushed her cart toward the glass doors, her heartbeat still uneven from the encounter. Had she broken another rule? Would the manager, with his cold eyes and clipped voice, hear of this? She shook the thought away. Sophie's small smile, the way her shoulders had lifted, was worth the risk. Malika adjusted her cap, whispering another French phrase, Je peux aider, I can help, a quiet vow to herself. Back in Oakland, the bus ride home was a blur of fog and sodium lights. Malika's apartment was dark, Ezekiel and Amos asleep, their snores a familiar comfort. She brewed tea, the steam curling in the dim kitchen, and opened her notebook. French verbs danced across the page, but her mind lingered on Sophie, on the weight of being seen, even for a moment. She closed her eyes, the hotel's grandeur fading, replaced by the warmth of her grandfather's love. She was invisible, but her heart had spoken, and somewhere in the shadows Grayson Caldwell had heard. The Gilded Gate Hotel shimmered under the weight of its own grandeur, its lobby a theater of wealth where chandeliers cast golden webs across the marble. Malika Johnson, 25, stood at the edge of this stage, no longer a shadow in a housekeeper's uniform but a shift manager, her new badge pinned to a crisp navy blazer. The promotion, offered by Grayson Caldwell after her unseen acts of brilliance, had thrust her into a world she'd only glimpsed from the sidelines. Yet, as she moved through the lobby, her steps measured, her dark eyes scanning the bustle of guests, she felt the air thicken with something heavier than the San Francisco fog. Resentment, sharp and unspoken, from those who'd once ignored. Malika's life was a tapestry of grit and quiet dreams. Orphaned at 7, raised by Ezekiel and Amos in an Oakland apartment where love was plentiful but money scarce, she'd learned to carry burdens with grace. Her foster grandfathers, with their gospel hymns and carved wooden birds, had taught her to shine despite the world's efforts to dim her. For years she'd scrubbed the Gilded Gate's floors, enduring the hiring manager's disdain for her black skin, her ambition hidden behind a veil of silence. She studied languages, German, French, Japanese, on a cracked laptop, each word a step toward a future she could almost touch. Now, as a manager, she stood on that threshold, but the ground beneath her felt unsteady. The lobby hummed with activity, guests in tailored suits weaving through with the confidence of those who belonged. Malika, stationed near the reception desk, coordinated the night shift with a clipboard in hand, her voice low but firm as she directed staff. Her fluency in languages, once a private refuge, now bridged gaps, calming a French couple's complaint, guiding a Mandarin-speaking diplomat to a conference suite. Her competence was a quiet force, but it drew eyes, not all of them kind. The housekeeping team, her former colleagues, offered tight smiles or avoided her gaze. The front desk staff whispered when she passed, their words like thorns. Diversity. Hire. Boss's pet. Malika felt the sting but pressed on, her grandfather's voices her armor. Your heart's your power, Amos had said, his hands steady as he carved. She clung to that, even as the whispers grew bolder. One evening, as she checked the shift log, a senior housekeeper muttered nearby, "From mops to management. Must be nice to have friends upstairs." Malika's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes on the page, her pencil steady. She'd learned long ago that silence was safer than confrontation, but silence couldn't shield her heart. That night, chaos erupted. A delegation of Japanese CEOs arrived, their tailored suits and clipped voices filling the lobby with urgency. They were here for a high-stakes merger, their briefcases stuffed with contracts that could reshape industries. Malika, overseeing the check-in, ensured their suites were flawless, her Japanese greetings precise and warm. But as the group moved toward the elevators, a shout broke the air. The lead CEO, Mr. Tanaka, clutched his empty hand, his face pale. His briefcase, containing irreplaceable documents, was gone, stolen in the blink of an eye. The lobby froze, the CEO's voices rising in a torrent of Japanese. Malika stepped forward, her pulse racing but her expression calm. "Shitsure shimasu," she said. "Excuse me," her fluency cutting through the panic. She listened as Tanaka described the briefcase. Black, leather gold clasp, last seen near the valet stand. The staff scrambled, security buzzing on radios, but Malika's eyes caught something else. A porter, young and nervous, lingering near the service elevator. His hands fidgeted, his gaze darting to the exit. She'd seen him before, always quiet. Always watching. Instinct took over. Malika signaled a security guard, her voice low. "Check the alley behind the service exit, now." She described the porter, her words clipped but certain. As security moved, she turned back to the CEOs, her Japanese steady as she reassured them. "We're handling this, Tanaka-san. Please let us work." Her calm anchored the group, their tension easing slightly. Minutes later, a guard returned, the briefcase in hand, recovered from a dumpster where the porter had stashed it. The thief, caught fleeing, was detained. The CEOs erupted in relief, Tanaka bowing deeply to Malika. "Your quick thinking saved us," he said in Japanese, his gratitude palpable. Malika nodded, her heart pounding, and translated his thanks for the staff. The lobby resumed its rhythm, but the moment lingered, a beacon in the fog. Grayson Caldwell, alerted to the crisis, arrived as it resolved, his gray eyes locking on Malika. He'd been watching her since her promotion, noting her quiet efficiency, her ability to turn chaos into order. Now, standing by the reception desk, he saw something more. A leader, not just a manager. "Meet me in my office," he said, his voice low. Malika nodded, her stomach twisting. Had she overstepped? As the CEOs were escorted to their suites, she followed Grayson to the executive floor, the elevator's hum a counterpoint to her racing thoughts. In his office, the city skyline glittered through tall windows, a stark contrast to the tension in the room. Grayson leaned against his desk, his coat draped over a chair. "That was extraordinary," he said. "Your instincts, your languages, they're wasted in shift management. I'm creating a role, International Guest Relations Lead. It's yours, effective tomorrow." Malika blinked, the words heavy as stone. "Why me?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Grayson's gaze didn't waver. "Because you see what others miss, you act when others hesitate." She wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. The whispers, the sneers, they'd only grow louder now. She nodded, accepting, but her hands clenched at her sides. "Thank you," she said, the words tasting like both victory and fear. Back in Oakland, the bus ride home was a blur of neon and shadow. Malika's apartment was dark, Ezekiel and Amos asleep, their snores a gentle rhythm. She sat at the kitchen table, her tea gone cold, her notebook open to a page of Japanese verbs. The promotion felt like a dream, but the resentment was real, a weight she couldn't shake. She thought of the porter, his nervous eyes, and wondered if he'd seen her as an enemy too. She thought of the housekeeper's words, the staff's stares. She thought of Ezekiel's voice, "Your heart's your power." Malika traced a phrase in her notebook. "Watashi wa katsu." I will win. She wanted to believe it, but the hotel loomed in her mind, its golden halls now a battlefield of envy. She'd risen, but at what cost? The whispers would sharpen, the eyes would narrow. She closed her notebook, her fingers trembling, and stared into the dark. Her talent, once hidden, was now a beacon, but it drew shadows as well as light. Grayson, in his office, watched the city below, his mind on Malika. He'd seen her potential, but he hadn't anticipated the resistance she'd face. He scribbled a note, protect her path, and set it aside. She was more than a manager, more than a solution. She was a force, and he'd ensure she had the chance to rise. Malika, alone in her kitchen, whispered, "I am enough." The words were a vow, a shield against the resentment that waited. She'd climbed one rung, but the ladder was steep, and the hands reaching to pull her down were many. The Gilded Gate Hotel stood like a gilded cage, its marble lobby a mirror reflecting wealth and whispers. Malika Johnson, 25, moved through its corridors, her navy skirt and silk blouse a far cry from the housekeeper's uniform she'd worn weeks ago. Her new role as International Guest Relations Lead, bestowed by Grayson Caldwell after her heroics with the Japanese CEOs, had elevated her to a world of glass-walled offices and global diplomacy. Yet as she stepped into the executive lounge, her badge glinting under the soft light, she felt the weight of eyes, sharp, judgmental, slicing through her like blades. The whispers that had begun with her first promotion had grown into a chorus, their venom seeping into the cracks of her resolve. Malika's life was a delicate balance of duty and dreams. Orphaned at 7, raised by Ezekiel and Amos in an Oakland apartment where love was the only currency, she'd learned to navigate a world that often turned its back. Her foster grandfathers, with their gospel hymns and carved wooden birds, had taught her to stand tall. For years, she'd scrubbed the Gilded Gate's floors, her black skin a target for the hiring manager's scorn, her ambition hidden in late-night language studies, German, French, Japanese. Now her fluency was her shield, her work a testament to her worth, but the hotel's golden halls echoed with doubt, not praise. The executive lounge was a sleek sanctuary, its leather chairs and frosted glass partitions a world apart from the service basement. Malika sat at a corner table, her tablet open to a schedule packed with tasks, coordinating a German delegation's itinerary, translating a French investor's contract, guiding a Korean media team through the hotel's protocols. Her fingers moved with precision, her mind a whirlwind of languages and logistics. She was good at this, better than good, but every keystroke felt like a defense against the murmurs that trailed her. Diversity hire, boss's favorite. She didn't earn it. The whispers had sharpened since her promotion. Colleagues in the office, with their polished degrees and practiced smiles, saw her as an intruder. They didn't know her story, the nights, spent studying by lamplight, the sacrifices for Ezekiel and Amos, the grit that had carried her from mops to management. They saw only her skin, her lack of a college diploma, and her rapid rise. One afternoon, as Malika prepared notes for a Mandarin-speaking guest, she overheard 2 assistant managers in the lounge, their voices low but cutting behind the frosted partition. "Nobody climbs that fast unless they're sleeping with someone," one said, her tone dripping with disdain. "Especially someone like her. Housekeeper to this? Please, Grayson must like her little language tricks." Malika froze, her pen hovering over her tablet. The words were a slap, their implication a poison that burned her chest. She wanted to stand, to confront them, but her body wouldn't move. She sat, her breath shallow, as the women left, their laughter echoing like a taunt. The lounge felt smaller, the air suffocating. She stared at her reflection in the tablet's screen. Dark eyes, coiled hair, a face that carried her grandfather's strength but now felt like a mask. Was this what they saw? A fraud? A woman who'd traded integrity for favor? She pushed the doubt down, but it lingered, a shadow that followed her through the day. Her work didn't falter. She greeted the German delegation with flawless courtesy, translated the French contract with precision, guided the Korean team with warmth, but each task felt heavier, as if the whispers had added weight to her shoulders. She avoided the break room, where the housekeeping staff now turned away, their silence louder than words. She ate lunch alone in her office, a small space with a view of the city's fog-shrouded skyline, and wondered if she'd traded one form of invisibility for another. Back in Oakland, the night was a refuge. Malika's apartment was dark, Ezekiel and Amos asleep, their snores a familiar lullaby. She sat at the kitchen table, her tea cooling, her notebook open to a page of Malay verbs, her latest language. The words blurred as her mind replayed the lounge's venom. She thought of Ezekiel's hands, rough from years of driving buses, and Amos's gentle voice as he carved. "Your mind's your power," he'd said. She wanted to believe it, but the whispers were a tide, pulling her under. She stood, moving to the fire escape, the city sprawling below like a sea of lights. The fog was thick, muffling the world, and Malika let it wrap around her. She whispered a Malay phrase, "Saya cukup," I am enough, but the words felt hollow. She'd risen, but at what cost? The hotel, once a battlefield of labor, was now a minefield of judgment. She thought of Grayson, his steady gaze, his belief in her. Was he wrong? Or was she? At the Gilded Gate, Grayson Caldwell stood in his office, the city a canvas of gray beyond the windows. He'd noticed the change in Malika. Her shoulders tighter, her smiles rarer. The whispers had reached him too, carried by staff who thought he didn't listen. He knew the cost of her rise, the way success could draw envy like moths to a flame. He'd faced it himself, a working-class kid turned magnate, his every move scrutinized. But Malika's burden was heavier, her skin a target in a world that claimed fairness, but rarely delivered. He pulled her file again, the sparse details, mocking her truth. Malika Johnson, 25, high school diploma, hired 2022. He thought of her German call, her French with Sophie, her Japanese with the CEOs. She was a force, but forces drew storms. He scribbled a note, monitor staff dynamics, and set it aside. He couldn't shield her from the whispers, but he could ensure her path stayed clear. Her talent deserved that. Malika, on the fire escape, traced the city's lights with her eyes. She thought of Sophie, the French girl, whose smile had been a small victory. She thought of the CEOs, their gratitude a fleeting warmth. She thought of her grandfathers, their belief a fire that hadn't dimmed. The doubt was real, but so was her strength. She returned to her notebook, her pencil moving again, Malay verbs taking shape. Each word was a defiance, a reminder that she wasn't defined by their words. The hotel loomed in her mind, its golden, halls a paradox, opportunity and opposition in equal measure. She'd climbed, but the ladder was slick with resentment. She closed her notebook, her fingers steady, and whispered, "I will win." The fog swallowed her words, but they echoed in her chest, a vow against the shadows. Grayson, in his office, watched the fog roll across the bay. He thought of Malika, her quiet power, her unyielding heart. She was rising, but the world was watching, waiting for her to fall. He wouldn't let it happen, not while he stood. Malika, alone in the dark, felt the doubt linger, but it no longer ruled her. She was enough, and she would prove it. To them, to herself, to the grandfathers who'd raised her to shine. The Gilded Gate Hotel loomed like a gilded fortress, its marble corridors cloaked in the hush of midnight. At 11:20 p.m., the lobby's chandeliers cast soft shadows, their light a fragile shield against the fog pressing against the glass doors. Malika Johnson, 25, stood in a dim hallway off the executive floor, her silk blouse catching the faint glow of a wall sconce. As international guest relations lead, she navigated a world of diplomacy and languages, her days a whirlwind of German contracts, French greetings, and Japanese protocols. But tonight her heart was heavy, the whispers of her colleagues, diversity hire, boss's favorite, still echoing like a bruise. Her black skin, her rapid rise, had made her a target, and the doubt they sowed clung to her like damp air. Malika's life was a testament to resilience. Orphaned at 7, raised by Ezekiel and Amos in an Oakland apartment where love outshone poverty, she'd learned to defy a world that diminished her. Her foster grandfathers, with their gospel hymns and carved wooden birds, had taught her to shine. For years she'd scrubbed the Gilded Gate's floors, enduring the hiring manager's scorn, her ambition hidden in late-night studies of German, French, and Japanese. Now her languages were her power, her work a quiet rebellion, but the hotel's golden halls were a battlefield of envy and suspicion. She was reviewing a guest protocol with Grayson Caldwell, the hotel's owner, in the hallway, their voices low to avoid disturbing the late-night hush. Grayson, 38, stood with his coat draped over one arm, his gray eyes sharp but softened by a rare warmth. He'd seen her potential, her German call, her French with Sophie, her Japanese with the CEOs, and elevated her, but he'd also seen the toll of the whispers. "You're doing exceptional work," he said, his tone steady. Malika nodded, her tablet clutched like a shield. "Thank you," she murmured, but her thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in the doubt that gnawed at her worth. Then a sound, low, urgent, like a snake's hiss, cut through the silence. Malika froze, her eyes darting to a nearby alcove where two men in tailored suits stood, their heads bent close. Their voices were hushed, their words in Malay, a language Malika had been studying for months. She caught fragments. Children. Shipment. Midnight. French girl. Her blood turned to ice. The phrases were coded, but their meaning was unmistakable. A trafficking ring operating through the hotel, targeting children, including Sophie, the French girl Malika had comforted weeks ago. She grabbed Grayson's arm, her grip tight, and signaled for silence. Her heart pounded, but her mind was razor-sharp, parsing the Malay with practiced ease. She leaned close, her whisper barely audible. "They're talking about trafficking kids. Sophie's one of them. Midnight, basement." Grayson's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing to slits. He nodded, his voice a low growl. "We stop this. Now." Malika's pulse raced, but she felt a surge of clarity, her fear eclipsed by purpose. She'd faced doubt, scorn, and invisibility, but this was bigger, a darkness she couldn't ignore. They slipped into a nearby office, the door clicking shut behind them. Malika's fingers flew over her tablet, pulling guest logs and security feeds. The men, registered as Malaysian diplomats, had booked a private meeting room in the basement, a space rarely monitored. She translated more of their conversation, her Malay precise. "The French girl's family is distracted. She's easy to take." Grayson's face was stone, but his voice was steady. "We need the police, but quietly. No mistakes." Malika nodded, her mind racing. She knew Sophie's room number, her family's schedule. She knew the hotel's blind spots, learned from years as a housekeeper. Grayson called a trusted contact at the San Francisco PD, his words clipped, urgent. Malika, meanwhile, cross-referenced the guest logs, spotting anomalies, late-night deliveries, unregistered visitors. Her languages, once a private dream, were now a weapon, decoding the traffickers' coded messages embedded in reservation notes. "They're using fake names," she whispered, pointing to a discrepancy. "This diplomat checked in with no passport scan." Grayson's eyes met hers, a flicker of admiration breaking through his intensity. "You're incredible," he said, almost to himself. The police arrived within the hour, plainclothes officers blending into the hotel's late-night rhythm. Malika and Grayson guided them to the basement, their steps silent on the service stairs. The air grew colder, the walls narrowing, the hum of the hotel's machinery a low pulse. Malika's heart thudded, memories of Sophie's tear-streaked face flashing in her mind. She'd promised the girl she was enough, and now that promise was a vow, to save her, to stop this evil. In the basement, the meeting room's door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling out. The officers moved first, their weapons drawn, their voices sharp as they breached. Malika and Grayson stayed back, her breath shallow, his hand brushing hers in a fleeting gesture of reassurance. Shouts erupted, then silence, broken only by the sound of cuffs clicking. The officers emerged, escorting the two men, their faces pale with defeat. Behind them, 7 children, wide-eyed and trembling, were led to safety. Sophie, her blonde hair tangled, ran to Malika, her small arms wrapping around her waist. Malika knelt, her eyes burning as she hugged Sophie close. "You're safe," she whispered in French, her voice trembling but sure. Sophie nodded, her tears soaking Malika's blouse. The other children from countries Malika could only guess were guided to waiting vans, their futures reclaimed. The police praised Malika's quick thinking, her translations the key to unraveling the ring. Grayson stood beside her, his silence a steady presence, his gaze heavy with respect. Back in Oakland, the night was a blur. Malika's apartment was dark, Ezekiel and Amos asleep, unaware of the battle she'd fought. She sat at the kitchen table, her tea untouched, her notebook closed. The weight of the night pressed against her, the traffickers' voices, Sophie's hug, the children's haunted eyes. She'd faced doubt, but this was different. This was evil, raw and real, and she'd helped stop it. Yet the victory felt fragile, overshadowed by the knowledge that such darkness existed, hidden in the hotel's golden halls. She moved to the fire escape, the city's lights muted by fog. She thought of her grandfathers, their belief in her a beacon. She thought of Grayson, his trust a quiet strength. She whispered a Malay phrase, Saya Menang, I won, but the words were a prayer, not a boast. The hotel, her battlefield, had revealed a deeper war, one against cruelty, against despair. She'd risen, but the shadows remained. Grayson in his office stared at the city below, the fog a veil over his thoughts. Malika's courage, her brilliance, had saved lives tonight. He'd seen her potential, but this was more, a heart that burned brighter than any empire he'd built. He scribbled a note, support her, always, and set it aside. She was a force, and he'd stand by her no matter the cost. Malika, on the fire escape, felt the night's chill, but her resolve was warm. The doubt, the whispers, the darkness, they hadn't broken her. She was enough, and she'd fight on for Sophie, for the children, for herself. The Gilded Gate Hotel stood silent under a starlit sky, its golden glow muted by the San Francisco night. Malika Johnson, 25, stepped out of the service entrance. Her navy coat buttoned against the chill, her badge, International Guest Relations lead, tucked away. The weight of the past week clung to her, heavy as the fog rolling off the bay. She'd faced darkness in the hotel's basement, her Malay translations unraveling a child trafficking ring, saving Sophie and others. The victory was hers, but the whispers of her colleagues, diversity hire, Grayson's favorite, still stung, their venom a shadow on her rise. Tonight, she felt both invincible and fragile, a paradox carved by courage and doubt. Malika's life was a bridge between sacrifice and hope. Orphaned at 7, raised by Ezekiel and Amos in an Oakland apartment where love was richer than money, she'd learned to defy a world that dismissed her black skin. Her foster grandfathers, with their gospel hymns and carved wooden birds, had taught her to shine. She'd scrubbed the Gilded Gate's floors, endured the hiring manager's scorn, and built dreams through late-night studies of German, French, and Japanese. Now her languages were her strength, her role a testament to her grit, but the hotel's golden halls were a crucible, forging her in fire and suspicion. Grayson Caldwell had called her that evening, his voice low through the phone. Meet me tonight, somewhere quiet, no work, just us. Malika had hesitated, her heart a tangle of fear and curiosity. The rumors, her rise tied to his favor, loomed large, but his tone, steady and unguarded, had disarmed her. She'd said yes, a single word that felt like stepping off a cliff. Now, as she stood outside the hotel, a sleek black car pulled up, its driver silent, offering her a bottled water as they wound through the city's hills, leaving the neon pulse of downtown behind. The car stopped at a cliffside overlook, a hidden perch above the Pacific where waves crashed against rocks far below. Grayson waited there, standing beside a wooden bench in a rooftop garden, wild sage and lavender, swaying in the breeze. The city sprawled beneath them, a sea of lights flickering through the fog. He wore no coat, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, his gray eyes catching the starlight. You came, he said, a faint smile breaking his usual reserve. Malika nodded, her breath catching at the view. It's beautiful, she said softly, her voice nearly lost in the wind. They sat on the bench, the wood cool beneath them, a paper cup of warm mulled wine in her hands, its spices grounding her. The silence between them was comfortable, charged with something unspoken. Grayson spoke first, his voice low, tracing his past. My father was a janitor, worked nights in motels across Ohio. I grew up cleaning with him, learning to see what others missed. He paused, his gaze on the city. I built this empire to prove something, but sometimes I wonder who I'm proving it to. Malika listened, her heart softening. She saw him not as the magnate, but as a man shaped by struggle, like her. She shared her own truth, her voice steady, despite the ache. My grandfathers raised me after my parents were gone. Ezekiel cooked collards, Amos carved birds. They had nothing but love, and they gave it all to me. She spoke of nights studying by flashlight, of the hotel's scorn, of the whispers that cut deeper than she'd admit. "I've fought to be enough," she said, her eyes on the horizon. "But sometimes I'm scared I never will be." The cue. Words hung in the air, raw and honest. A confession she hadn't planned. Grayson turned to her, his gaze piercing yet gentle. "You're more than enough, Malika. I saw it the first night, your German on that call, your heart with Sophie, your courage in the basement. You're a force." He paused, his voice dropping almost a whisper. "I see you, not just your skills, but you, and I've never met anyone who makes me feel this." His hand gestured between them, a fragile bridge. "I'm scared too. Scared of what this means, of the rumors of losing something real before it begins." Malika's breath caught, her heart a drumbeat in the quiet. The rumors flashed in her mind, she's sleeping her way up, their poison a weight she carried. "If people find out," she said, her voice barely above the wind, "they'll say it's why I'm here. They'll erase everything I've done." Grayson's eyes held hers, unflinching. "Let them talk, we'll keep walking. I'm not here to lift you up, Malika, I'm here to walk beside you." His words were a vow, not a promise of rescue, but of partnership. She looked at him, the city's lights a halo behind his silhouette. He didn't reach for her, didn't cross the space between them, but his presence was a warmth she hadn't known she craved. She thought of Ezekiel's hands, Amos's smile, the languages she'd mastered in the dark. She thought of Sophie, safe because of her. And she thought of herself, the girl who'd scrubbed floors and dreamed of more. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling but true. "But I want this, whatever it is." She extended her hand, her fingers brushing his, a touch more honest than words. They sat in silence, the wind weaving through the garden, the waves a distant roar. The moment was delicate, sacred, a turning point neither could unmake. Grayson's hand closed gently over hers, his thumb tracing a quiet circle. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice an anchor. Malika nodded, her heart full, her fears, not gone but shared. The city below hummed its restless song, but up here they were alone, two souls finding each other in the vastness. Back in Oakland, Malika's apartment was dark, Ezekiel and Amos asleep, their snores a familiar comfort. She sat at the kitchen table, her tea untouched, her notebook closed. The overlook lingered in her mind, Grayson's words, his touch, the possibility of something real. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but not weak. She'd faced doubt, darkness, and now this, a connection that terrified her as much as it thrilled her. She moved to the fire escape, the city's lights muted by fog, and whispered a French phrase, "Je suis assez, I'm enough." The words were a prayer, a claim to her truth. Grayson, in his office, stood by the window, the bay a canvas of shadow. Malika's courage, her heart, had shifted something in him. He'd built an empire, but this honest, fragile thing was rarer. He scribbled a note, "Be her strength," and set it aside. She was rising, and he'd be there, not to lead, but to stand with her. Malika on the fire escape felt the night's chill, but her resolve was warm. The whispers, the risks, the darkness, they hadn't stopped her. She was enough, and for the first time she believed someone else saw it too. The Gilded Gate Hotel stood like a beacon on San Francisco's Nob Hill, its marble halls softened by the golden light of late summer. Months had passed since the night that shook its foundations, when Malika Johnson, 25, had unraveled a child trafficking ring with her Malay translations, saving Sophie and others. Now, as international guest relations lead, Malika moved through the hotel with quiet authority, her navy blazer and silver badge a far cry from the housekeeper's uniform she'd once worn. The whispers that had haunted her, diversity hire, Grayson's favorite, had faded, drowned by the weight of her competence. Yet as she stood in her office overlooking the city's fog-veiled skyline, Malika felt the echoes of her past, a reminder of how far she'd climbed and how fragile the summit could be. Malika's life was a tapestry of resilience and love. Orphaned at 7, raised by Ezekiel and Amos in an Oakland apartment where dreams outshone poverty, She'd learned to defy a world that scorned her black skin. Her foster grandfathers, with their gospel hymns and carved wooden birds, had taught her to shine. She'd scrubbed the Gilded Gates floors, endured the hiring manager's disdain, and built a future through late-night studies of German, French, and Japanese. Now her languages were her crown, her role a testament to her grit. But the hotel remained a mirror, reflecting both her triumphs and the scars of her rise. Her days were a whirlwind of diplomacy, coordinating multilingual tours, negotiating with global partners, training staff in cultural nuances. She handled a South African envoy with warmth, guided a French tech mogul through the city's protocols, and translated for a Korean media delegation with precision. Her office, modest but elegant, held a small shelf of language texts and a framed photo of Ezekiel and Amos, their smiles her anchor. The staff, once wary, now sought her guidance. Their questions about etiquette, translations, guest preferences, met with her steady expertise. The housekeeping team, her former colleagues, offered nods of respect, their tight smiles replaced by genuine warmth. Her competence had silenced the doubters. Her courage had earned their trust. Yet Malika carried a quiet tension. The rumors had faded, but their memory lingered, a reminder of how quickly acceptance could turn to judgment. She thought of Sophie, the French girl, now safe with her family, who'd sent a letter inviting Malika to Paris. She thought of the children she'd helped save, their faces a weight she carried with pride and pain. And she thought of Grayson Caldwell, the hotel's owner, whose confession on the cliffside overlook had shifted something in her heart. Their bond, unspoken but real, was a warmth she hadn't dared hope for, but it came with risks, eyes that watched, tongues that waited to wag. Grayson was a constant presence, not as a boss, but as a partner. They collaborated on projects, debriefed over coffee, shared quiet moments in the hotel's rooftop garden. His gray eyes, once sharp with calculation, now softened when they met hers, a silent acknowledgement of their shared path. He'd kept his promise to walk beside her, never pushing, never presuming, but his presence was a steady flame, warming the edges of her doubt. Malika, for her part, felt her walls crumble, her fear of the rumors giving way to something braver. Trust, fragile but growing. One evening, as Malika crossed the lobby to a meeting, she paused by the main entrance. A young housekeeper, no, older than 19, was polishing the brass handles, her uniform loose, her shoes scuffed but clean. Her movements were careful, her eyes alert despite the late hour. Malika recognized herself in the girl, the quiet diligence, the hidden spark. She stopped, her heels clicking softly on the marble. "Is this your first week?" she asked, her voice warm. The girl straightened, startled, her hands clutching the rag. "Yes, ma'am," she said, her voice small but clear. Malika smiled, her gaze steady. "You're doing good work. Don't ever think nobody sees it." The girl's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise giving way to a shy nod. Malika turned, her heart full, and walked on, the moment a mirror to her own past. She'd been that girl, invisible but burning with potential, and now she was the one offering light. The lobby, once a battlefield, felt softer, its grandeur less daunting. Back in Oakland, Malika's apartment was a haven. Ezekiel and Amos greeted her with warm hugs, their pride a balm to her soul. "You're changing the world, Star," Amos said, his hands steady as he carved a new bird. Malika laughed, helping Ezekiel with dinner, their kitchen filled with the scent of collards and cornbread. She told them about Sophie's letter, about the staff's respect, about the girl at the entrance. She didn't mention Grayson, not yet. Their bond was too new, too precious to share. But as she sat on the fire escape later, the city's lights, shimmering through the fog, she felt him, a quiet presence in her thoughts. She opened her notebook, a page of Malay verbs catching the moonlight. She whispered, "Saya melihat," I see, a phrase that felt like a vow, to see herself, to see others, to keep shining. The hotel, her grandfather's, Grayson, they were threads in a tapestry she was weaving, one of courage and love. The whispers, the darkness, the doubt, they hadn't broken her. They'd shaped her, and she was stronger for it. At the Gilded Gate, Grayson stood in his office, the bay a canvas of shadow beyond the windows. He'd watched Malika's rise, her grace under pressure, her ability to turn resentment into respect. She was more than he'd imagined that first night, when her German call had caught his ear. She was a leader, a light, and now, a part of his heart. He scribbled a note, billed with her, and set it aside. Their future was unwritten, but he knew he wanted her in it, not as a savior, but as an equal. Malika on the fire escape felt the night's chill, but her resolve was warm. She thought of the young housekeeper, of Sophie's letter, of Grayson's hand brushing hers. She'd climbed from the shadows, not by chance, but by choice. The hotel, once a cage, was now a stage, and she was no longer invisible. She closed her notebook, her fingers steady, and whispered, "I am enough." The words were a truth, etched in her soul, a beacon for the horizon ahead. Grayson in his office looked out at the city, his thoughts on Malika. She was rising, and he'd be there, not to lead, but to share the journey. The Gilded Gate, with its golden halls and hidden truths, had brought them together, and now it was theirs to shape. Malika, alone in the dark, felt the weight of her past lift, replaced by the promise of what lay beyond. She was enough, and the world was beginning to see it too. The Sloan Amsterdam Hotel rose like a dream above the Prinsengracht Canal, its glass facade reflecting the soft hues of Dutch rooftops. 6 months had passed since Malika Johnson, 25, stood on San Francisco's cliffs with Grayson Caldwell, their hands brushing in a quiet vow. Now, on the hotel's stone terrace, she stood alone, her silk scarf, a gift from Grayson, fluttering in the crisp Amsterdam air. As Director of International Strategy, Malika had led the hotel's European expansion, her name etched in gold on her office door. The girl who once scrubbed floors at the Gilded Gate was now a force, her languages and courage reshaping an empire. Yet as she gazed at the canals below, their waters shimmering under the October sky, Malika felt the weight of her journey, a tapestry of scars and stars. Malika's life was a monument to resilience. Orphaned at 7, raised by Ezekiel and Amos in an Oakland apartment where love eclipsed poverty, she'd defied a world that scorned her black skin. Her foster grandfathers, with their gospel hymns and carved wooden birds, had taught her to, shine. She'd endured the Gilded Gate's hiring manager's disdain, mastered German, French, and Japanese in the dark, and risen from housekeeper to leader. She'd saved Sophie and others from a trafficking ring, her Malay translations a blade against evil. The whispers, diversity hire, Grayson's favorite, had faded, replaced by respect earned through grit. Now, in Amsterdam, she was building a legacy, not just for herself, but for those who'd never been seen. Her days were a symphony of strategy, hiring multilingual staff, crafting cultural protocols, negotiating with Dutch, Belgian, and French partners. She navigated boardrooms with grace, her voice steady in German, her gestures warm in French, her precision sharp in Japanese. The hotel's opening had been a triumph, its glass doors welcoming dignitaries from across Europe as cameras flashed. Grayson had introduced her on the stage, not just as a director, but as the woman he was building a future with. The media buzzed, some praising her brilliance, others murmuring about their bond, but Malika's work silenced the skeptics. Guests felt her touch in every detail. Seamless translations, curated experiences, while staff thrived under her leadership, her questions and listening ear making them feel valued. Malika's office overlooked the canal, its shelves lined with language texts and a photo of Ezekiel and Amos, their smiles her compass. A letter from Sophie's family, inviting her to Paris, sat framed on her desk, a reminder of the lives she touched. Universities in the U.S. requested her as a speaker. A Dutch foundation asked her to mentor refugee girls in translation. One stormy afternoon, a letter arrived from a California college offering an honorary degree in applied linguistics. Malika's hands shook as she read it, not because she needed validation, but because it closed a circle. Her dreams, once buried in grief, had found their voice. She cried, alone in her office, the rain a soft echo of her release. Grayson was her anchor, their bond a quiet strength. They lived in a modest apartment by the canal, its warm wood floors and bookshelves a haven. He cooked simple meals, soup, pasta, while she steeped tea with cardamom, a nod to Ezekiel's recipes. Their evenings were filled with conversation. From global logistics to childhood memories, their feet tangled under a blanket. The past, her days scrubbing floors, his nights cleaning motels, faded, not forgotten but transformed. They carried their scars, but they no longer defined them. Grayson's support was unwavering, his gray eyes a promise that she was enough, not just as a leader, but as his partner. Malika's transformation was internal too. She walked into rooms without shrinking, spoke without softening her intellect, lived without apologizing for her brilliance. The whispers, the trafficking ring, the doubt, they'd forged her, not broken her. She thought of the young housekeeper she'd encouraged at the Gilded Gate, her scuffed shoes a mirror to Malika's past. That moment, months ago, had planted a seed. She was no longer just rising, she was lifting others. Her leadership was personal, her vision inclusive, her legacy a beacon for those who'd been invisible. One morning, passing through the Amsterdam hotel's lobby, Malika noticed a young porter, his uniform crisp but his eyes tired. He was stacking luggage, his movements careful, his face a mask of focus. She paused, her heels silent on the polished floor. "You're doing good work," she said, her voice warm. "Someone always sees it." The porter blinked, a shy smile. Breaking through, Malika walked on, her heart full, the moment a quiet echo of her journey. She'd been that porter, that housekeeper, and now she was the one offering hope. Back in their apartment, Malika returned early, kicking off her heels as Grayson read on the couch, a dog-eared novel in hand. "You're home," he said, his smile soft. She curled beside him, her head on his shoulder. "I needed a night to remember who I am," she said. He tilted his head. "And who's that?" She paused, the canal's shimmer catching her eye. "A woman who's no longer invisible," she said, her voice steady, a truth carved in her soul. Grayson set his book down, his hand finding hers. "You've always been visible to me," he said, his words a vow. Malika smiled, the weight of her past lifting, replaced by the expanse of her future. She thought of Ezekiel and Amos, their pride a fire across the ocean. She thought of Sophie, the children, the porter, the girl she'd mentor. She thought of herself, the girl who'd whispered languages in the dark and now spoke them to the world. The Amsterdam night was quiet, the canal's ripples a soft song. Malika stood by the window, Grayson beside her, their reflections a shared dream. The Gilded Gate with its golden halls and hidden battles had been her crucible. But this hotel, this city, this life, was her creation. She'd built it not by chance but by choice, with language, dignity, and a courage that burned through the fog. Malika whispered, "Saya Kukup, I am enough," the Malay phrase a prayer and a promise. The world had tried to dim her, but she'd shone brighter, not just for herself but for those who'd follow. She was no longer a guest in this world. She was its architect, and her story was just beginning. Malika Johnson's journey, from an invisible housekeeper to a global leader, reminds us that courage and heart can reshape the world. Her story is a beacon, shining through doubt, darkness, and dreams. What moved you most? Was it her resilience, her languages, or the love that carried her? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and tell us, where are you watching from? Your voice matters, just like hers. Thank you for joining us, for feeling this story with us. Subscribe to catch our next tale of triumph, and we'll see you soon, ready to shine together.